Hello. Good morning, good afternoon, and good night. I am Ramin Nassehi, a teaching fellow at the Department of Economics at UCL, and I would like to give you a taste of what it's like to study economics at UCL. So this is how we're going to proceed today. I am going to talk very general things about globalization and world trade and pose some questions to you to think about and in order to encourage a conversation between us. So let me start. The title of my talk is The End of Globalization, but let's go backward and focus on what has happened in the past 4 decades. I argue that we live in the age of hyperglobalization. What do I mean by that? Just pause and have a look around in your room. Have a look at the products that you see around you. Almost all of them are the outcomes of globalization. For instance, I see around myself, I see this iPhone, my shirt, my eyeglasses, this laptop, and this screen. All of them are the outcomes of globalization in a sense that they have been produced internationally. So what do I mean by hyperglobalization? I mean that the production of each of these things have been broken down to different stages and outsourced to different countries. Let's take the example of iPhone. For instance, probably the computer chip of iPhone has been produced in South Korea. The software of it has been produced in California. Someone has designed the brand in California. And finally, someone in China has assembled the iPhone together, getting all the equipments, assembling them, and exporting it all over the world. So iPhone is a product of hyperglobalization. So, same with my shirt here. The cotton of it has been probably produced in India. That cotton has been exported to Bangladesh, turned into a cloth, and someone has produced this in Bangladesh and then exported back to probably Zara or Gap in London and marketed there and sold to me. So in that sense, we are living in a highly integrated world, and I challenge you to look at around your room and find a single product that has not been produced internationally, that has been produced within one single country. I challenge you. So let's look at this trend that I talked about, this trend of integration among countries in the past 4 decades. One of the good indicators of globalization or integration between economies is the rise in the value of world trade. How much countries have been exporting or importing with each other. Now let's look at the value of world trade in the past 4 decades. Now let me jump to my chart and let's focus on this chart. This chart shows you the increase in the value of trade happening at the global level. All the imports and exports between countries in the past 4 decades, since 1980s, roughly the time that I was born. If we consider the value of world trade as 100 in the year 1980, we have increased the world of globalization, export and trade to 500, an increase of 5-fold in the global trade in the past 4 decades, within my lifetime. Now, a question to you. So we witnessed a massive expansion in world trade in the past 4 decades. That's the question. What has been the main driving factors behind this explosion in trade across countries? Of course, there are many factors, but I want you to think of them and write them in the chat, and then we can follow up the discussion. So I repeat the question. What have been the main drivers behind the massive increase in world trade in the past 4 decades? I'll wait for your answers in the chat. I'll wait for a few more seconds and then I will proceed. Okay, very good answers. Already impressed. Thank you. So, Ellie mentioned technology, very good. And then uh, Jibril, yes, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, have says improvements in logistic such as containerization. Spot on. I'm very impressed. One of the big improvements, one of the main technological improvements in the past 4 decades had been the inventor of containers. So, exactly, very impressed. So, the container box, these boxes that you always see in the news, whenever someone is talking about the economy going up or down, you see these containers in a port, and that has been one of the main improvements in transportation costs. The containerization have dramatically reduced the cost of trading between countries. So that's one technological factor that's very important. However, people talked about, more political factors. For instance, Tom talked about trade liberalization. Trade liberalization is a deliberate decision made by a politician. So it's a deliberate political choice made to remove trade barriers. It's completely different from technological improvements. Technological improvement is more bottom up. Trade liberalization is top down. So very good, Tom. So far we had containers, box transportation, and then a deliberate decision to liberalize trade. Very good. We had other answers as well. Aha, I was waiting for this one. One technological factor that we missed, but later on was mentioned, was the advent of internet. That's very important. You might ask what internet has got to do with trade, right? But think about this. So if Apple wants to really outsource different parts of iPhone production to different countries, it needs to coordinate them. So a headquarter needs to coordinate all these global supply chains. And for that, you need internet. Without internet, we wouldn't have this global production chain. So very impressed. Thank you. So far, if you want to summarize the factors, two technological factors, the advent of container box, and the other one, the internet. The internet was the other factor that was mentioned. All of these helped facilitate the rise of global value chains. And third, as Tom mentioned, a political factor, a deliberate decision to remove all the trade barriers. And here, if you look at my slides, let me go back to my slides for a second. I summarized all these factors. Summarize all these factors with icons. The first one is a container box, the Wi-Fi sign is for internet, and the open door is a deliberate decision, a political decision to liberalize trade. Very good. Very good. Now, let's focus on the next stage. This process, political decisions made to liberalize trade. Let me show you my next chart and pose the following question to you. First of all, thank you for your comments. Already impressed. Thank you. Thank you. Now, let's focus on the trade liberalization. That means a deliberate decision for countries to remove the trade barriers. This chart shows you, just focus on the title here, a unilateral tariff reduction by developing countries, right? So this means, what do we mean by unilateral? That means nobody has forced you to reduce your tariff rates. What is a tariff rate? Tariff rate is a barrier to imports. For instance, let's take the example of 50%. If your tariff rate is 50%, if you want to improve something that costs £100, you have to pay £50 in tariffs. If something costs £100, you have to pay £50 in tariffs. So that's the tariff rate. We see in the past 4 decades a unilateral reduction in tariff rates. That means countries, without any explicit force, decided to reduce their tariff rates, decided to remove the barriers of trade. Why do you think that was the case? Why countries unilaterally reduce their tariff rates? Please, waiting for your answers in the chat. I would be impressed if someone can answer this. The question is why countries unilaterally decided to reduce their tariff rates. Nobody forced them to do so. They made a decision, as you see, almost all regions to reduce their tariff rates, their barriers to imports, making it easy for other countries, making imports easier and exposing their industries to competition. Why they did that? Okay, very good, very good. Let's go to your answers. First of all, Anne-Marie, very good point. It might be in the fear of retaliation, right? If you don't open up, others wouldn't open up, so you cannot export your product. Very good. But there's one problem with this explanation. Why it took all these countries until 1988, yes, to start reducing these things, right? So your logic holds throughout history. Very good logic, but incomplete. It's part of the story. Very good. Claude mentioned maybe is the change of ideas. People, politicians suddenly decide to say, that we should all become more open to trade so that everyone becomes richer. This is very good. Haruka, yes, competition makes better products in the long term. Yes, countries exposing their own firms to competition so that in the long term, competition makes you stronger. Very good. This one is we are getting close with this answer. Yeah. Reduce price of imports to benefit consumers. We're getting very close here. So all of your explanations have been spot on, but it's incomplete. putting all the pieces together. But there's one final piece, and this comment gets very close to it. Very good, very good. So I give you a few more seconds to think about this. So we already had fear of retaliation, exposing your economy to competition, very good, and reducing the price of imports. That's very good. I'll stop here. I'll wait for more answers. I would be impressed. We just need one little step so that we get the final answer. So I'll be back. Okay, very good, very good points by Anne-Marie and the rest, and Haruka, very good. So we had fear of retaliation so far, competition makes better products, and finally, reducing the price of imports. Now, let me give you one final thing that complements all these answers. And it's very close to this comment, as I mentioned. Now, let's think about this. Whenever you see tariff rates, everybody thinks about tariff rates on consumer goods. But what about tariff rates on intermediate goods? Think about China. If China wants to assemble iPhones, the first step is you need to import the components. You need to import the components. So you need to reduce the tariff rates for the intermediate goods. So the intermediate good, all the components in here come, you assemble them together and you export them. So that's the main thing. With the rise of production change, with the rise of outsourcing, if you want to be part of this global value chain, if you want to produce shirts, you have to reduce your tariff rates for the import of cotton. Right? Otherwise, you wouldn't become part of the global value chain. So that is the main essence here. Countries unilaterally reducing the tariff rates because they want to join the global production chain. So if I want to, let me come back, hello. If you want to complement these answers, I would say reduce the import prices for intermediate goods. Reduce the price of intermediate goods so that you can assemble them together and export. Very good, very good. So, very impressed. Thank you. Let me just pose one final thing. I have 5 more minutes. Let me pose this question to you. I'll be quick. Now, we talked about globalization really taking off in the past 4 decades. Now let's talk about the main winners and losers of globalization. Let's think about 5 characters. Who were the main winners? Who benefit the most? Who experienced the highest rate of income? Who experienced the decline? I introduce you 5 characters and I want you to have a vote. Let me remove this comment. So the first character. The first character is a farmer in Kenya. Has this person a main winner of globalization or loser? Has this person experienced a massive increase in income in the past 4 decades, or a stagnant income, or maybe a reduction? So first character is farmer in Kenya. The second character is low-skilled worker in China, probably assembling iPhone. The next character is a high-skilled worker in India, producing softwares. And fourth character is a low-skilled worker in the US, probably assembling cars in Detroit, for instance. And our fifth character is a high-skilled worker in a rich country, let's say US. A person, a trader for Goldman Sachs, or a software designer for Google. Now, the question, I want you to pick one person out of these as the main winner of globalization in the past 4 decades, the person who has experienced the highest rate of income growth in the past 4 decades. Who has experienced the highest rate of income growth in the past 4 decades? I'm waiting for your answer. Okay, so the highest, the low skilled worker in China and the high skilled worker in the US. So this person here and this person. Now let me give you the answer. Whoops, the answer is ready. Tada, this. The main winners have been in developing countries, actually. They have experienced the highest rate of income growth. And that makes sense because they are starting from a very low base. You are starting from a low base, so you're going to experience a high rate of income, because of this. But with a high skilled worker, you're already rich. You're going to get richer, of course, at a fast rate, but not at a rate that other people's lives is changing. So they were the winners, and they were the main winners of globalization. Now, who were the main losers? The main losers. I'm waiting for your answer about, we identified the winners, now the losers. As you all guessed correctly, the losers are, again, farmer in Kenya and low-skilled worker in the US. We all know the low-skilled worker in the US, why that person is a loser. But why the farmer in Kenya is a loser? That's interesting. Anyone with an explanation why a farmer in Kenya has been the main loser? One of the main losers. So we all know the story of low-skilled worker in the US. That person, probably in Detroit, was working in a Ford factory, now gets outcompeted by a person in a developing country. What's the story with farmer in Kenya? That I'll leave you to think about. I need to wrap up. So the famous elephant chart shows you the winners and the losers of globalization. On the y-axis, we have the cumulative gain in income, cumulative increase in income. And on the x-axis, you have your place in the world distribution. So Kenya's poor, the farmer was already among the poor. They experienced one of the lowest increases in income. Something to think about. Why? And then the highest increase in income goes in the middle with a slow-skilled worker in China and a high-skilled worker in India. They experience about 80% of growth in their income. It's a massive growth. And finally, a little bit lower than them, around 50, 60%, is the high-skilled worker in the US, the famous elephant chart. Now, this is probably one of the most important charts. If you want to understand what's happening in our world today, right, we need to focus on the people who have been the losers of globalization, and that chart really helps us. And on that note, I am going to thank you to join me for this taster session, and thank you for your marvelous interactions. Very impressed. Thank you. Thank you, Anne-Marie. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Haruka, and all others who commented. So thank you, and I hope to see you soon in UCL. Thank you. Take care. Enjoy the rest of the open day.